Eleanor was 72 years old when she buried her husband of 46 years. Richard died on a Wednesday in March. His heart gave out while he was pruning the rose bushes he'd tended since they bought the house in 1978. The paramedics said it was quick. Eleanor wasn't sure that made it better. The funeral was held at St. Mark's, the same church where they'd married. Her son Derek wore a navy suit he'd bought for the occasion and shook hands with every mourner like he was already the man of the house. Her daughter Julia stood beside him in black heels that clicked against the marble floor every time she shifted her weight. 200 people came. Eleanor stood by the casket until her feet went numb. She thanked each person the same way, "Thank you for coming." Richard would have appreciated it. She didn't cry. Not because she wasn't heartbroken, but because she'd learned long ago that crying in front of people only gave them permission to leave. The reading of the will happened 6 days later. Derek arranged it. He'd always been good at arrangements. Julia sat across from Eleanor at the dining room table, the same table where they'd eaten Thanksgiving dinner for 3 decades. Derek had a folder. Julia had a pen. Eleanor had nothing but the clothes she'd worn to the funeral because she hadn't yet found the energy to change out of them. "Mom, we need to talk about Dad's estate," Derek said. He didn't look at her when he said it. He looked at the folder. Eleanor nodded. She knew what was coming. She'd known since the day Richard's heart stopped. "The house," Derek continued, "Dad transferred the deed to my name 8 years ago. After his first bypass. It was an estate planning measure. You remember." Eleanor remembered. Richard had sat her down and explained it as a practical decision. "It'll save the kids from probate," he'd said. "They'll take care of you." She'd trusted that. She'd trusted a lot of things. "So technically," Derek said, "the house is mine. I'm not kicking you out, Mom. But Julia and I have been talking. It's a lot of house for one person. The maintenance, the taxes, the upkeep. We think it would be better if you downsized." Eleanor looked at her son. She looked at his face, at the jaw he'd inherited from Richard, at the eyes that wouldn't meet hers. "Where would I go?" Julia jumped in. "There's a nice assisted living place about 20 minutes from here." "Mom, it's really nice. They have activities and meals and, I'm 72, Julia. Not 92. It's not about age," Derek said. "It's about practicality." That word again. Practicality. "And the bank accounts?" Eleanor asked. Derek and Julia exchanged a glance. That glance told Eleanor everything. "We moved the funds into a trust," Derek said. "For estate management purposes. Julia and I are co-trustees." "You emptied the accounts." "We secured them," Julia corrected. "Mom, you're not good with finances. You've always said that yourself." Eleanor had said that. She'd said it because Richard had always handled the money, and she'd let him because that was what wives did in 1978. She'd never learned. She'd never needed to. Until now. "The car." Eleanor's voice was quiet. "Julia's going to take it," Derek said. "You won't need a car where you're going." Eleanor sat very still. 46 years of marriage. 46 years of packing lunches and driving carpools and sewing buttons on shirts and sitting in hospital waiting rooms. 46 years reduced to a single conversation at a dining room table. "Is there anything left?" she asked. Derek flipped a page in his folder. "There's that old storage unit your father rented. The one out on Route 12. Dad always said it was full of junk. We figured you'd want to sort through it yourself. Personal effects and all." Eleanor almost laughed. A storage unit. A dusty box of memories they couldn't be bothered to sell. "I'll take it," she said. Derek blinked. "Take what?" "The storage unit." "I'll take it." Julia leaned forward. "Mom, there's nothing in there." "We looked. Just old furniture and boxes. It's not worth the back taxes." "You said it's mine." Neither of them argued. Why would they? They'd gotten the house, the car, the bank accounts, the life insurance. The storage unit was a punchline. A liability. A thing they'd forgotten to fight over. That evening, Eleanor sat alone in the bedroom she'd shared with Richard for 46 years. The drawers were already half empty. Julia had started packing. Eleanor opened the nightstand on Richard's side of the bed. Inside, beneath a stack of old birthday cards, she found a small brass key wrapped in a yellowed envelope. On the envelope, in Richard's handwriting, "For Eleanor, the place your father lost." She turned the key over in her palm. It was old, rusted, unlike any key she'd seen in their house. Her father had died when she was 23. He'd been a quiet man who worked at a printing press and never talked about his past. Richard had never mentioned a key. Never mentioned a place. Eleanor held it tight in her fist. Her children had taken everything that had a price tag. But this small, strange, forgotten thing, they'd missed. She didn't know what it opened. Not yet. But for the first time since Richard's heart stopped, Eleanor felt something other than grief. She felt curious. The storage unit was exactly what her children had described, run down, forgotten, and buried under $45 a month of back fees that Eleanor paid with the last of the cash she'd hidden in her sock drawer. Richard had taught her that trick years ago. "Always keep a little somewhere only you know," he'd said. She'd never understood why until now. The facility sat at the end of a gravel road off Route 12. The gate was rusted open. The lock on her father's unit, Unit 17, was old but still intact. Eleanor cut it with bolt cutters she'd borrowed from a neighbor who didn't ask questions. The door groaned upward, and the smell of mildew and time rolled out like something alive. Inside, the light from the doorway fell across a lifetime of neglect. 3 trunks sat in the far corner, their leather cracked and peeling. A wooden dresser with a broken leg leaned against the wall. Boxes stacked in no particular order, their cardboard softened by decades of humidity. A lamp with a frayed cord. A rocking chair that might have been beautiful once. Everything coated in a fine gray dust that glittered in the afternoon light. Eleanor stood at the threshold for a long moment. This was what her children had laughed at. This was the punchline. A dead man's junk in a concrete box. But she'd learned something in the weeks since the funeral. People who laugh at what you keep are usually the same people who take what you have. She started with the trunks. The first 2 held old clothes, her mother's dresses, her father's work shirts, moth-eaten and fragile. She set them aside gently. The third trunk was smaller, made of darker wood, and secured with a brass lock that looked nothing like the others. Eleanor pulled Richard's key from her pocket. The key slid into the lock without resistance. It turned with a soft click that echoed off the concrete walls. Inside the trunk, there were no jewels. No stacks of cash. No gold coins wrapped in velvet. What she found was stranger, and somehow more valuable. A leather journal, its cover soft with age. A second journal, smaller, stuffed with loose pages. A folded map, so old the creases had begun to separate. And beneath all of it, a deed. Legal paper, stamped and notarized, dated 1931. Eleanor unfolded it carefully, as if it might crumble in her hands. It described a parcel of land in the Appalachian Mountains, a defunct railway tunnel, deeded to her father's father, then to her father, and now to her. She didn't understand at first. A tunnel? Why would anyone own a tunnel? She opened the larger journal and began to read. Her father's handwriting filled the pages, small, precise, almost timid. He wrote about his own father, a man named Samuel, who'd run whiskey during Prohibition. Samuel had used the tunnel as a hiding spot, a transfer point, a place where shipments could disappear and reappear without anyone being the wiser. When the law got too close, Samuel sealed the tunnel and walked away. He died without telling anyone what was still inside. Her father had written, "They never found the second shipment. I looked once, years ago, but the tunnel was partially collapsed. I was too afraid to go far." If you're reading this, Eleanor, that means I never found the courage. Maybe you will. Eleanor set the journal down. Her hands were steady, but her mind was racing. A second shipment. Prohibition-era whiskey, possibly, or something else entirely, hidden in a mountain tunnel for nearly a century. Her children had taken her house, her car, her money. They'd left her a key and a punchline. But the punchline had a map attached. She unfolded the map fully. It showed the old railway line, the tunnel's location, and a hand-drawn X marked in fading red ink. The tunnel was in a remote part of eastern Kentucky, miles from the nearest paved road. The deed confirmed ownership. The land was hers. Eleanor sat on the concrete floor of the storage unit, surrounded by dust and mildew and the ghosts of two dead men, her father and his father. She was 72 years old. She had no house, no car, no bank account to speak of. But she had a key, a map, and a question that wouldn't let her go. What was in that tunnel? Her children had laughed at the storage unit. They'd dismissed it as worthless. They'd missed the one thing that mattered because they only knew how to see what things cost, not what they could become. Eleanor folded the map, tucked the journals under her arm, and walked out of Unit 17 into the fading afternoon light. She didn't know how she'd get to Kentucky. She didn't know what she'd find if she got there. But she'd spent 46 years being practical. Being careful. Being the woman who let her husband handle the money. The bus left Columbus at 6 in the morning. Eleanor sat by the window with a backpack that held 2 changes of clothes, a flashlight, the journals, the map, and the key. She had $200 in cash, most of which went to the ticket. The rest would have to last until she figured out what came next. She didn't know what came next. She only knew she couldn't stay. The ride took 9 hours. The landscape flattened, then wrinkled into hills, then rose into the kind of mountains that made her feel small in a way she hadn't felt since childhood. She watched the towns pass, small, hard, the kind of places where people minded their own business and kept secrets without trying. By the time the bus dropped her at a gas station in a town called Pikesville, the sun was low and her legs were stiff. She asked the attendant about the old railway tunnel. He looked at her like she'd asked about a ghost. "That's 10 miles east, off County Road 14. Nothing out there but trees and ticks. You got family out there?" "I'm looking for something my father left," Eleanor said. The attendant shrugged. "You'll need a ride. Nobody's gonna walk that road after dark." Eleanor found a motel that charged $40 a night and smelled like old cigarette smoke. She slept badly, dreaming of dark tunnels and locked doors. In the morning, she hired a local man with a pickup truck to take her as far as the road allowed. He let her off at a weathered gate marked with a sign she couldn't read. "This is as close as I can get," he said. "You sure about this?" "I'm sure." He drove away. Eleanor stood at the gate and looked at the mountains. The tunnel was somewhere in those hills, a mile, maybe 2, through overgrown trails and fallen branches. She tightened her backpack straps and started walking. The path was barely visible. Decades of neglect had turned the old railway bed into a tangle of briars and saplings. Eleanor moved slowly, careful with her footing. The air was cool and damp, and she could hear water somewhere nearby, running over rocks. She walked for an hour, then another. Her legs ached. Her lungs burned. But she didn't stop. She found the tunnel entrance just before noon. It was cut into the side of a hill, framed by stonework that had held for nearly a century. Vines draped over the opening like curtains. And there, where the darkness began, stood a steel door. It was newer than the tunnel, mid-century, maybe, and secured with a heavy brass padlock. Eleanor pulled Richard's key from her pocket. Her hands were shaking, though she wasn't sure if it was from exhaustion or fear or something else entirely. The key slid into the padlock. It didn't fit. She tried again, turning it the other way. Nothing. Her heart sank. Then she noticed a second lock, smaller, set into the door itself, hidden beneath a layer of rust. She tried the key there. It turned with a resistance that felt almost reluctant, as if the door had been waiting decades for someone to ask permission. The lock clicked open. The door groaned on hinges that hadn't moved in 50 years. Eleanor pulled out her flashlight and stepped inside. The tunnel was cold. Not the cold of a winter day, but the deep, steady cold of earth that never sees the sun. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, a slow, rhythmic sound like a heartbeat. The walls were rough stone, covered in patches of moss that glowed faintly under the beam of her light. The floor was packed dirt, interrupted by old railway ties that had rotted into softness. She walked forward slowly, her footsteps echoing off the walls. The air smelled of wet stone, rust, and something else, something sweet and woody, like bourbon barrels in a rickhouse. She walked for what felt like 100 yards. The tunnel curved slightly, and then the beam of her flashlight caught something that made her stop breathing. Barrels. Dozens of them. Stacked 2 and 3 high along both walls of the tunnel, stretching as far as she could see. Oak barrels, dark with age, each one stamped with a name she didn't recognize, Old Commonwealth Distilling Company, EST 1898. The wood was intact, though the metal hoops had turned orange with rust. Dust and cobwebs covered everything. But the barrels themselves looked solid. Preserved by the cold, the darkness, the steady temperature of the mountain. Eleanor walked closer. She ran her hand over the nearest barrel. The wood was cool and smooth. She counted as she went. 40 barrels. 40 full barrels of whiskey that hadn't seen daylight since before World War II. She didn't know what to do. She stood there in the middle of a mountain tunnel, surrounded by a fortune she couldn't yet understand, and she laughed. Not a happy laugh. Not a sad one. The laugh of someone who'd been given a miracle and had no idea what to do with it. Back in Pikesville, she found a local historian, a woman named Mabel who'd written a book on prohibition in the region. Eleanor showed her the stamp on one of the barrels. She'd brought a photo. Mabel's eyes went wide. Old Commonwealth went bankrupt in 1943. Their master distiller died the same year. Nobody knows the recipe. This isn't just bourbon, Eleanor. This is ghost bourbon. Whiskey that doesn't exist anymore. If these barrels are real, they're worth a fortune. Collectors would pay tens of thousands per bottle. Maybe more. Eleanor sat in Mabel's kitchen and listened. Tens of thousands per bottle. 40 barrels. She didn't know how many bottles that would be, but she knew it was more money than she'd ever imagined. "Can you help me?" Eleanor asked. Mabel looked at her for a long moment. "I can connect you with an appraiser I trust. But Eleanor, you need to be careful. Once people find out what you have, everyone will want a piece." Eleanor nodded. She'd already learned that lesson. Her children had taken everything she'd let them see. She wasn't going to make that mistake again. Tea Woman was gone. Mabel kept her word. 3 days later, Eleanor found herself sitting across from a spirits appraiser named Harrison Cole in his Louisville office. The room smelled of old leather and newer whiskey. Harrison was in his 60s, with thick glasses and the kind of calm confidence that came from handling other people's fortunes for 40 years. Eleanor placed a small sample from one of the barrels on his desk, just 2 ounces in a glass vial she'd carefully sealed. Harrison uncorked it, swirled it, smelled it, and then, just barely, tasted it. He didn't speak for a full minute. "Mrs. Thorne," he finally said, "where did you say you found this?" "I didn't say." He nodded slowly, as if that was the answer he'd expected. "This whiskey is pre-war. Probably early 1940s. The mash bill is unlike anything on the market today. If the rest of the collection is consistent, and if there are 40 barrels as you've described, you're looking at a valuation between $12 and $18 million. Depending on how you sell it." Eleanor sat very still. 12 to 18 million. The number was so large it didn't feel real. It felt like a mistake, like something that happened to other people in stories she didn't believe. But Harrison wasn't smiling. He was writing numbers on a pad, calculating yields and bottle counts and auction estimates. This was real. "What would you do?" Eleanor asked. Harrison took off his glasses. "I wouldn't sell everything at once. You release this many bottles at the same time, you flood the market and kill the price. Ghost bourbon is valuable because it's rare. Keep it rare. Sell in small batches, 20, 30 bottles at a time, through private collectors who sign non-disclosure agreements. Stretch it over 5 years. Pay your taxes. Keep quiet. Keep quiet." Eleanor had spent the last month learning how to do exactly that. She didn't tell her children. She didn't tell anyone except Mabel and Harrison. She used some of the money from the first private sale. A collector in Chicago paid $60,000 for 24 bottles, to secure the tunnel. She hired a local welder to reinforce the steel door and install a new combination lock. She paid the back taxes on the storage unit, which she now owned outright, and transferred the deed into the trust she'd established with Harrison's lawyer. Then she opened a bank account in a different county, one her children had never heard of, and deposited the proceeds in small, careful increments. The second sale was larger. $90,000. The third, $42,000. By the end of the first 3 months, Eleanor had $250,000 in an account that didn't appear on any of Derek's searches. She used some of it to fix her teeth, a small thing, but one that made her feel like a person again, not a ghost. She bought a used sedan. She took a weekend trip to a bed and breakfast in the mountains, the first vacation she'd taken alone in 40 years. And she waited. Meanwhile, in the suburb where Eleanor had spent most of her adult life, her children were running out of money. Derek had sunk a large chunk of the estate into a renovation project that went over budget. Julia had bought a new car and taken her family on a Caribbean vacation, telling herself she deserved it. The house they'd taken from Eleanor, the house she and Richard had bought together, was now listed for sale, because Derek's wife wanted something newer. They hadn't expected the market to cool. They hadn't expected the renovation to cost twice what they'd planned. They hadn't expected to feel the weight of money disappearing faster than it came. It was Julia who noticed first. She'd called Eleanor's old number out of habit, the number that had been disconnected, and when she couldn't reach her mother, she started asking questions. A neighbor mentioned seeing Eleanor at the dentist. The dentist mentioned she'd paid in cash. The cash led to more questions, and the questions led to a creeping unease that Julia couldn't shake. How is she paying for any of this? Julia asked Derek over the phone one evening. She's not, Derek said. You're imagining things. I'm not imagining anything. She got her teeth fixed, Derek. That's $4,000, minimum. Where did she get $4,000? Silence on the line. Then Derek's voice, tighter now, I'll look into it. But there was nothing to find. Eleanor's new account was in a different county. Her sales were private. Her name wasn't on any public record except the storage unit, which Derek had already dismissed as worthless. She'd learned, finally, how to be invisible. How to let people assume she had nothing while she quietly built everything. She wasn't seeking revenge. She wasn't even angry anymore. She was simply done being the person they thought she was. The court papers arrived on a Tuesday. Eleanor was sitting on the porch of the small house she'd rented near Pikesville, drinking coffee and watching the morning fog lift off the mountains. The envelope was from the county clerk's office, and inside was a petition for guardianship filed jointly by Derek and Julia. They claimed Eleanor was suffering from dementia, that she was being exploited by unknown parties, and that she lacked the capacity to manage her own affairs. They requested that Derek be appointed as her legal guardian, with full control over her person and estate. Eleanor read the petition twice. Then she set it down and finished her coffee. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't even hurt. She'd spent enough time watching her children to know that Derek would never let go of control willingly, and Julia would never say no to Derek. The only thing that surprised her was how predictable they were. She called Harrison first, then his lawyer. The lawyer's name was Miriam Voss, a sharp woman in her 50s who'd handled estate disputes for wealthy families and knew exactly how to read a petition like this one. "It's weak," Miriam said over the phone. "No medical evidence. No doctor's affidavit. They're banking on your age and the fact that you moved away. But we need to prepare." Eleanor had 3 weeks until the hearing. She used every day. She drove to her old doctor in Columbus, the one she'd seen for 15 years, and underwent a full cognitive evaluation. The doctor wrote a statement declaring Eleanor of sound mind, with no signs of dementia or impairment. Eleanor paid for it in cash and left with a notarized copy. She collected her bank records from the county where she'd opened the new account, every deposit and withdrawal neatly documented. She asked Mabel to write an affidavit confirming the whiskey's provenance and Eleanor's clear-headed management of the collection. Then she went back to the tunnel, not for the barrels, but for the one thing she'd known might save her. At the bottom of the steamer trunk, beneath the journals and the map, she'd found an envelope addressed to her in her father's handwriting. She'd opened it only once, read it, and then tucked it away for a moment like this. The letter was short. Her father had written, "Eleanor, if you're reading this, you found the tunnel. What's inside belongs to you alone. Not to a husband, not to children, not to the bank. I kept it secret because I knew someone would try to take it. Tell no one until you have to. Then tell the truth. Dad." She folded the letter and slipped it into her jacket pocket, next to the key. The courtroom was small, paneled in fake wood, with fluorescent lights that hummed. Derek sat on the left with his attorney, a man in a cheap suit who kept shuffling papers. Julia sat beside Derek, her hands folded, her face carefully blank. Eleanor sat on the right with Miriam. She wore a blue dress she'd bought for the occasion and her father's key on a chain around her neck. The judge was a woman in her 60s with tired eyes and a voice that had heard every kind of family disaster. Derek's attorney went first. He argued that Eleanor's sudden relocation, her unexplained income, and her refusal to communicate with her children were evidence of diminished capacity. He suggested she was being manipulated by a local historian and an appraiser, people who, he implied, were after her money. He had no medical records, no witness statements, nothing but speculation. Then Miriam stood. She submitted the cognitive evaluation, the bank statements, Mabel's affidavit, and a detailed timeline of every decision Eleanor had made since leaving Columbus. She called Eleanor to the stand. The judge asked Eleanor simple questions: her address, the date, the name of the president. Then harder ones: how she'd found the tunnel, what she'd done with the whiskey, why she hadn't told her children. Eleanor answered each one calmly, her voice steady. "I didn't tell them," she said, "because they already took everything I had. The house, the car, the bank account. They left me a storage unit full of junk. They didn't know what was in it because they didn't care. They only care about money they can spend." Derek's attorney objected. The judge overruled. Eleanor pulled her father's letter from her pocket. "May I read this, Your Honor?" The judge nodded. Eleanor read slowly, her voice clear. "Eleanor, if you're reading this, you found the tunnel. What's inside belongs to you alone. Not to a husband, not to children, not to the bank. I kept it secret because I knew someone would try to take it." She folded the letter and looked at her son. "My father wrote that 30 years ago. He knew, before I did, that my own children would try to take what wasn't theirs." The judge took a moment. Then she dismissed the petition. "There is no medical evidence of incapacity," she said. "The respondent has demonstrated clear, competent, and documented management of her affairs. The petition is denied." Derek's face turned red. He stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. "This isn't over," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. Outside the courthouse, he cornered Eleanor on the steps. "You think you've won? You've got money from God knows what, and you're hiding it. That's fraud. It's none of your business." Eleanor's voice was quiet, but it cut through his noise like a blade. "You took what I let you take, Derek. The house, the car, the accounts, I let you have them because I trusted you. I won't make that mistake again. You don't get to take what I earned. Not ever." She walked to her car without looking back. Julia didn't follow. Neither did Derek. Months passed. The leaves turned, then fell, then the mountains wore a coat of snow that glittered under winter sun. Eleanor stayed in her rented house, sold whiskey in quiet batches, and learned what it felt like to wake up without dread. She didn't hear from Derek. She didn't expect to. But Julia was a different story. Julia arrived on a Saturday in February. Eleanor saw the rental car pull up the gravel drive from her kitchen window. She watched her daughter get out slowly, stand by the door for a full minute, and then walk to the porch like someone approaching a witness stand. Julia looked thinner than Eleanor remembered. Her hair was longer, less styled. She wasn't wearing the heels and pearls she'd worn to the funeral. Just jeans, a coat that had seen better days, and boots with mud on the soles. "Can I come in?" Julia asked. Eleanor stepped aside. They sat at the kitchen table. Eleanor made coffee, the same percolator she'd used since the bus ride, and set a mug in front of her daughter. Julia wrapped her hands around it like she was cold, though the house was warm. "I'm not here for money," Julia said finally. "I didn't think you were." Julia stared into her mug. "I'm here because I couldn't sleep. I haven't slept in months. Every time I close my eyes, I see you on that bus. The bus we put you on. With $47. Eleanor said nothing. She waited. "I'm not going to apologize for the money," Julia continued. Her voice cracked. "I can't. Because I don't know if I would have acted differently. But I can apologize for not protecting you from Derek. I saw what he was doing. I knew he was pushing you out. And I let him. I stood there in that dining room and I let him take everything, and I told myself it was practical." "Practical," Eleanor repeated. "I was wrong." Julia looked up. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. "Not yet. I lost myself, Mom. Somewhere between Dad's death and the conservatorship and the court case, I stopped being a person and started being Derek's sister. That's all I was. The sister who agreed. The daughter who nodded." Eleanor reached across the table and touched Julia's hand. Just once. Then she pulled back. "Your marriage?" Eleanor asked. Julia shook her head. "Probably over. He says I'm not the woman he married. He's right. I don't know who that woman was anymore. I don't know if I ever did." They sat in silence for a long time. The clock above the sink ticked. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the gravel road. Then Eleanor stood, walked to the cupboard, and took down 2 small glasses. She opened a drawer and pulled out a bottle, not one of the old barrels, but a newer one, a batch she'd set aside for herself. She poured 2 fingers into each glass and set one in front of Julia. "What is this?" Julia asked. "Ghost bourbon. Your grandfather's legacy. The thing your brother will never taste." Julia picked up the glass. She smelled it carefully, the way Eleanor had taught herself to do. Then she took a small sip. Her eyes widened. I don't even know how to describe it." "Good," Eleanor said. "That's the point. Some things can't be described. They can only be shared." They drank slowly. The bourbon was warm, complex, older than both of them. Eleanor watched her daughter's face soften with each sip. This wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Forgiveness would take longer than a single afternoon. But it was a beginning, the first real beginning they'd had since the funeral. "I need help," Eleanor said finally. "Selling the rest of the barrels. Ethically. Quietly. I can't do it alone forever." Julia set down her glass. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if you want to come home. Not to the old house. Not to Derek's version of home. To here. To this." Eleanor gestured at the kitchen, the mountains outside the window, the bottle between them. "I'll teach you what I've learned. You'll earn your keep. And maybe, over time, you'll remember who you were before you became someone's shadow." Julia didn't answer right away. She looked at her mother, truly looked at her, for the first time in years. Then she nodded. "I'd like that." They finished the bourbon as the sun set behind the mountains. Derek's name never came up again that evening. He had made his choice. He would not speak to either of them. But that was his loss, not theirs. The grant fund started quietly, the way most good things do. Eleanor didn't name it after herself. She called it the Samuel Fund, after her grandfather, the bootlegger who'd hidden the whiskey in the first place. $50,000 to start, then another 50, earmarked for legal aid and emergency housing for elderly victims of financial abuse. She worked with a small nonprofit in eastern Kentucky, the kind of organization that didn't ask for press releases or photo opportunities. They just needed money to pay lawyers and bus tickets and security deposits. Eleanor gave them what they needed. She'd been on a bus with nothing. She knew what that felt like. She kept 1 barrel for herself. Not to drink, she'd never been much of a drinker, but to remember. The barrel sat in the corner of her living room, dark oak, stamped with the name of a distillery that had died before she was born. Sometimes she ran her hand over the wood. Sometimes she just looked at it. The money had bought her freedom, but the barrel itself was something else. It was proof that her father had hidden something for her, not from her. That was the difference. That was what her children had never understood. A secret kept to protect is not a betrayal. It's a gift, wrapped in silence, waiting for the right moment to be opened. Spring came to the mountains. The snow melted into creeks that ran clear and cold. Julia stayed. She learned how to sample bourbon, how to talk to collectors, how to keep a ledger that balanced. She called her children every Sunday. She didn't call Derek. Some fractures take longer to heal than others. Some never do. On an evening in late April, Eleanor and Julia sat on the porch. The sun was low, painting the hills in shades of gold and purple. Crickets were starting their evening song. Eleanor held the rusty key in her palm, the key that had opened the storage unit, that had led her to the tunnel, that had changed everything. She turned it over, feeling the weight of it. Then she dropped it into a small wooden box on the table beside her. The box already held her father's letter, the map, and a single photograph of Richard from their wedding day. We don't need it anymore, Eleanor said. Julia looked at the box. It feels like closing a door. Or opening one. Eleanor leaned back in her chair. That key was never really about the tunnel. It was about trust. My father trusted me to find it. I trusted myself to use it. Now it's done. The door stays open on its own. They sat in companionable silence. No more court dates. No more hiding. Just a mother and a daughter watching the sun sink behind mountains that had kept secrets for 100 years. The whiskey would sell. The fund would grow. Derek would do whatever Derek would do. But none of that mattered as much as this moment, ordinary, quiet, hard one. Eleanor looked out at the hills. Somewhere beneath them, the tunnel still sat in the dark, empty now of all but memory. She didn't need to go back. She'd already found what she was looking for. Not the bourbon. Not the money. Just the knowledge that she had been worth hiding something for. That, she finally understood, was the only thing that had ever mattered.